Hi, everyone. I'm Shashin. I'm the VP of EMEA for AiDASH, and I'm the one standing between you and the bar because I'm going to be the moderator for the next two sessions. I've got two great guests with me, but in this session and the next one, we're going to talk about biodiversity, improving habitats, natural capital. How do you improve them at scale, and what is the value that utilities can derive out of that? So before we continue, I'll just let the guests introduce. Sally?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's been a real pleasure. I'm Sally Hayns. I'm the Chief Exec of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, or CIEEM for short, which is the professional body for ecologists and environmental managers in the UK, primarily in the UK and Ireland, although we do have members overseas, including the States.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick White. I'm a principal advisor for an organisation called Natural England. So we advise the government on environmental matters in England and the UK, and our particular focus is on working on Biodiversity Net Gain, working with Sally, but also working with utility sector developers and landowners within England as well.
Thank you. So for those who don't know, United Kingdom, and particularly England, passed a law earlier this year, had a law go into force earlier this year, which requires all developments in the country to improve biodiversity on the land as they do the development. Nick is the one who led the creation of the metrics, and Sally and CIEEM, they are enabling the ecologists in the country to be able to support that. So what we want to be able to achieve through this conversation is give you a glimpse into how that is being done at the scale of a nation, and how can that knowledge can be transferred into the context of the vast amount of land that the utilities have to manage and improve in the US. So I start with the first question around that, more in context of what the users might understand. So how is improving biodiversity and condition of habitats in general in line with the business goals for the utilities?
So over the course of today, we've heard a lot about risk and the importance of kind of resilience as well, making sure the networks keep providing power to people. The kind of equally kind of challenges around cost, reductions in budgets, trying to deliver the same outcomes at the same time. And one of the things that historically has often been seen is nature and development infrastructure being in kind of tension or conflict with one another. But actually they're not. There's a real opportunity through how estates, how line sites gets managed and maintained, both to provide fantastic opportunities for nature. Often these can be the most valuable kind of areas of habitats for wildlife to live in, but also managing areas in a way that also reduces that risk as well, reduces the risk to the operator, increases the resilience and performance of those linear assets. And it's kind of getting that conversation together. So we were talking earlier about trees and the risk of trees falling onto power lines. And people, when they're thinking about a woodland or thinking about a forest, they kind of naturally default to trees as being really important. But actually, for nature's perspective, the really valuable spaces often aren't associated with the trees. It's the open areas as well. It's the open habitats you get. So there is an opportunity to kind of manage estates in a way that are, help with the performance and resilience of the network, but actually are increasing the biodiversity value. And there's a growing kind of international and kind of local drive too, because of the nature crisis we're in, to look at nature almost as a new asset class coming forward as well. So there's increasing levels of investment. There's private and kind of philanthropic investment going into that, which in England is paying people to actually manage their estates for nature as well. So that means that for some infrastructure operators and other developers, they can get third parties to actually pay for that long-term management and maintenance as well. So it ceases to be a cost to the actual kind of infrastructure owner. It's something that actually potentially becomes a financial asset to them.
And just building on that, if I may, I mean, we've got a climate emergency. We also have a biodiversity crisis. The two are interlinked. We're seeing, certainly in all countries of the UK, some increasing regulation around managing biodiversity loss. A lot of that loss is derived from business operations. So government and policy is looking to business increasingly to reverse some of that loss and invest in improving biodiversity. So there's a compliance element to it, But there's also that element of understanding the risk to operations. A lot of raw materials, for example, a lot of ecosystem services are biodiversity derived that companies, businesses rely on. And if we keep degrading those ecosystem services, then we're going to damage the resilience of those business operations. So it's in a business's interest to try and find ways of investing in reversing biodiversity loss, enhancing biodiversity. And as Nick has alluded to, it can actually really boost and be profitable, or certainly more cost-effective for businesses. If I could give a couple of quick examples. Starting with a water company, a company called Southwest Water. Unsurprisingly, it's in the southwest of England. It's supplying drinking water over a very large area. Much of the river and stream source is surrounded by farmland, by agricultural land. And the company was spending a lot of money investing in downstream water purification in order to create the drinking water that was required. Probably about 15 years ago now, it started a program called Upstream Thinking. And instead of spending money on building engineered water purification systems, it started working with farmers and landowners, local community groups and charities to invest in changing agricultural practices. So less use of herbicide, less use of fertilizers, pesticides, animal antibiotics, by helping farmers change their practices, reducing soil erosion, increasing soil biodiversity, changing the height and vegetation type of some swards, which improved water drainage as well, slowed the flow of water into the stream and helped with flood risk management. And by doing that, by using nature-based solutions effectively, it was able to both, say, reduce the cost of water purification quite extensively, but also to really invest in improving nature, improving biodiversity in those areas, and helping the farmers and landowners to be more profitable as well. So it was a real win-win situation, and of course that also reflected well on the reputation of the company. And the other example I'll just draw on is a power company, SSEN, Scottish and Southern Electric Network, which obviously has the same issues that we've been talked about today in terms of risk from vegetation management, tree fall and so on. But they've used a lot of the areas that they had to clear to maintain the integrity of the power lines to create more pollinator-friendly grasslands around and underneath those areas. They've planted trees, but they've planted the right trees in the right place, not necessarily where they're going to compromise the power lines. At sea, the setting of the underground cabling had caused quite a bit of damage to coastal seagrass. And coastal seagrass is a really important carbon sink. It's also an important nursery for marine life. And also, it helps to break up wave action and slow down coastal erosion. So they're investing a lot in recreating those seagrass beds, which is producing a lot of nature biodiversity benefit, but also it's improving their reputation as a company and enabling the permitting process further on, because the regulators have more confidence in the sort of integrity, the biodiversity integrity and performance of the company.
Those are incredible examples. Does improving the quality of the land, biodiversity, improving the condition of those habitats also impact the resilience of the grid, its ability to impact on the grid reliability, reducing the incidence of vegetation management?
The physical management of the vegetation is the thing that improves the resilience of the grid. But I think what I'm probably trying to say is that you're still the landowner. You still have things that you can do with the land that will deliver good benefits for biodiversity, good benefits to your business, and it overall increase your cost effectiveness as well. And the other thing about being a nature positive company is that it's shown to be increasingly good for attracting talent into your organizations and talent retention. People want to work for companies with good reputations and feel they're part of doing that good. And similarly, customers increasingly want to think that they are buying from good companies. It was discussed earlier today about increasingly competitive market for customers. Being a nature positive utility provider can give you a bit of a market edge, quite frankly.
But just building on that as well, in terms of the resilience of the nature can provide to infrastructure, it's thinking about not just the actual physical routes themselves and how you could manage those to reduce the risk, but also potentially boost the kind of biodiversity alongside those. But also in terms of how kind of crews can get access to some of those sites as well. So thinking outside of the actual kind of route itself and engaging with the kind of wider kind of landscape, the landowners there, because as Sally was saying, there'll be instances where how others are managing their land and how they're managing their estate can have direct implications for the grid and the networks themselves as well. So if people aren't managing lands in a way that is helping to reduce kind of flows of floodwaters during extreme storm events, that's going to create problems for you as well. So but at the same time, you can also help others off the estate by helping with their own resilience. So there was an example earlier when someone was talking about, one of the regulators was talking about actually a lot of the networks through their territory were going through agricultural land. Farming, particularly for kind of crops, is heavily dependent on kind of pollination as a service as well, and provided by insects. And so it's a real opportunity to help boost the resilience of that sector by managing the land around the power grid lines in a way that you haven't got trees, so they're not going to be falling down, but you're encouraging kind of more florific flowers. They themselves provide a habitat for the insects that then the farmers need as well. So there's an opportunity to boost kind of the resilience of neighbours as well as the actual kind of infrastructure itself.
Yeah, for sure. But to be able to achieve this at a national scale, and you're both supporting that for the UK, what are some of the challenges that you see when you transfer that goal to a country like the US?
So one of the challenges in England in terms of trying to, as Sally was saying, having this policy to say, actually, you need to deliver a biodiversity net gain kind of outcome, is persuading politicians, regulators, others, that actually there's a business case behind this as well. And that was something that was a lot of work had gone into it, and credit to the sector and to the industry as well, because a lot of the work was actually done by them, thinking, actually, how can we change and adapt the management of our kind of the lands along our routes in a way that helps to de-risk both in terms of the kind of day-to-day performance, but also there's also a lot of risk if you're trying to kind of create new infrastructure as well, risk of delays through planning. And a lot of that is in terms of planning can be quite a contested space and arguments around what impacts or not your particular scheme is going to have on nature. So having a robust and objective way of being able to say, actually, this is how we can do something that's positive, that can help to kind of de-risk the planning process. That reduces potential costs for the developers. So in England, it was really critical to have that developer experience of piloting and testing approaches that could then be sold back into other government departments to say, actually, these two things can happen and work together as well. There is a business case behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, planning policy is looking to be nature positive, as well as trying to facilitate growth and development. So if as a business provider or as a developer, you're providing a win-win situation for the planning authority, and they can have both, they're going to be much more amenable to your proposition. And I think what really happened in England and was so important is that we had developers, businesses who were willing to give it a go, who were persuaded that biodiversity was important, that they needed not only to address their impacts on biodiversity, but look to help restore biodiversity, and were willing to, as you say, provide that business case, demonstrate that business case, which was then able to persuade government that that this was actually achievable, that it was deliverable. Because I think government or regulators do need to be persuaded. My experience is generally they can be a bit risk averse, and they're very wary of creating more burdens for business. So actually having businesses coming along and saying, look, we think this will work, we can do this, we can achieve this, that gives the government policymaker, a legislator confidence.
But a key part of this delivery is also using the available skill force, which is the ecologists in this case, who have to go out in the field and help users achieve the net gain. In upskilling them, and as a result of the increased requirements, there is a big shortage, which cannot be fulfilled in a short amount of time. So as a result of the increased demand and the challenge of less number of ecologists than we need in the market, how do you see the ecology as a profession evolving over a period of time in response to the need?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a little bit of a perfect storm in the UK. We don't have enough ecologists. And the work that they have done up to this point, certainly in the private sector, has been largely geared towards mitigation and designing mitigation. So this new system of biodiversity net gain, designing to be biodiversity positive, creates some skills challenges, as you say, but also some capacity challenges, which we're not going to be able to fix in the short term. But that's where we need to use technology. We need to be working smarter and using the tools that are becoming available to us. So, for example, the tools that AiDASH and other companies have been developing are saving time. There still needs to be ground truthing, but they're doing a lot of the baseline assessment work with increasing accuracy, and that's saving a lot of time and allowing the ecologists to use their skills to do the more sort of interpretative and design work. And that's got to be the way of the future. And in time, these tools are going to be increasingly taught at university in degree programs, and ecologists of tomorrow are going to come out expecting to have these kinds of tools and technologies available to them. So, it's as again was mentioned earlier today, there's a little bit of concern always that, is this going to be taking our jobs? But quite simply, there's too much work and not enough people, and we need to use the tools that are available to us to address that.
And as we were hearing earlier as well, the infrastructure is going across various topography, various terrains as well, which can themselves present challenges in terms of physical access and concerns around safety. And again, this is a real opportunity to make greater use of technology as well, to help provide you with the information that you need to kind of better kind of manage and assess those sites without necessarily people having to go as regularly as otherwise might be the case, and actually with all the kind of attendant risks for those workers out there as well.
And certainly for utility companies, they're major landowners. We're talking about huge scale here, and they need to be able to collect that data very efficiently and in a usable time. They don't want that data to be going out of date before it's unable to inform their decision making and their planning. So it's the scale of data collection, I think, is really attractive for utility companies in particular.
Yeah, and you made the point about graduating students expecting to use tools. I think most of them are already using ChatGPT for their university work. Yeah. So if you're not giving them smart tools, they'll probably not want to work for you. Yeah. And they'll choose an employer who's giving them the right set of tools. Speaking of tools, one of the key tools for achieving the biodiversity net gain that we have in England is the metric. It allows us to accurately and, in a way, measure and compare across two very different pieces of land the biodiversity on it. But England's model is very novel. It's still in very early stages of adoption by other countries. They're looking at it very closely. But in a large space of land like the US, where we don't have a similar approach yet, how do you suggest progress can be made while the metrics are being considered or still being drafted?
So the world of nature conservation was quite fascinating. We were hearing in this session earlier about the importance of information and data. The kind of the adage, what gets measured gets managed, is very, very true. But all too often, we didn't have much information about, we had lots about individual species, potentially, in some areas, but in terms of actually the kind of types of habitats that, was kind of developments were going across or interacting with, often we have very, very little information about that. And nature and the ecology is a complex subject as well. There's lots of kind of variables that impact on that. And one of the kind of challenges was, well, you've got two options. You can go down a route of trying to come up with really, really complex kind of ecological models to understand what impacts your developments or your schemes are having on nature. Or you can step back and say, actually, nature fundamentally needs places in which to live and thrive, and their habitats. And if you focus on those and kind of build in appropriate risks into a tool for kind of looking at kind of measuring that, that gives you a much simpler, if that's the right word, yet still kind of ecologically robust way of being able to say, okay, we can actually now start to baseline our sites. We can actually start to establish what type of habitats do we have there in the first place. And in doing that, we can then model, actually, if we make certain interventions around, actually, if we change the management here, if we put a different type of habitat in, what impact's that going to have as well? So that's the basis of the metric that's been, was developed in England. And the good news, in a way, is it's kind of gone global as well. So we did an exercise quite recently with a kind of range of international consultancies looking at, well, actually, how widespread is this? Because we're hearing anecdotally, it was in quite wide use. And it's actually in use on every continent now, bar Antarctica. There is a version of it that's free of charge, that's for the America's version. People, because the way it was developed in England, it was produced essentially by governments. That means it's free for everyone to use and access. And because it's relatively simple, people have been able to take it, take the kind of core tenets of it, and then adapt it and apply it to different kind of countries as well. So you'll find now that in countries as diverse as Saudi Arabia, in Canada, in Nigeria, in India, in China, people are using versions of this as well. So to organisations in the room are thinking, well, how do I go about starting a process? Then you've got an option. You could go down a really complex route. I would advise you against that to start with. Start simple. Start with this existing metric that's out there. Then, by all means, you can start to layer in additional information and kind of get a more informed kind of understanding. But these tools do exist now.
And if I could just pick up on it, I mean, we're on, in England, we're on version 4, so, Biodiversity Net Gain has just become mandatory as part of the planning system in England, so everybody has to use metric version 4. So there has been some experimentation, some iteration that has got us to metric 4, but the important thing is that we're all using the same metric, and at least I think across business types you need to use the same metric, so then you've got, you can do sort of fair comparisons. But using the same metric enables all the different planning authorities, they're all working to the same system, you're upskilling everybody in the same way. And the important thing about the metric as well is not just looking at what you've got or how much of it you've got, it's looking at the condition of it, it's looking at the distinctiveness of it, how important, how rare is it? So it's taking in, it's a bit more complex. As Nick says, nature is complex. But we did need a way to be able to represent it reasonably scientifically to a wider audience and to inform decision making. We can't make sort of ecology a dark art. So, so this enables us to do it. It's not perfect, and it will continue to iterate and improve over time. But it's a good science-based way of trying to evaluate what you've got and then plan to what you need to do to improve it.
Yes, and one of the key attributes of the metric is it requires you to measure and identify all the habitats on the ground. The classical approach, especially when covering large tracts of land, has always been to identify the samples and then use statistical techniques. You do diligence, you apply diligence in identifying the places you're going to sample, and then you use the techniques to extrapolate and identify what's on the ground. But now with a metric, being able to track every habitat theoretically and then do a grounds bottoms-up measurement, in terms of the possible gains that can be achieved using a metric-like approach, how do you think moving away from a sample-based methodology to an analysis of the entire population of land or the 100% of the land, what kind of differences in outcomes can be achieved as a result of that?
Well, a sample-based approach gives you a picture at one place at one time. And you could do that in lots of places and lots of times, but that's a lot of effort. So using the tools such as the BNG AI tool that you've developed, you can collect data about the whole site, and you can do that repeatedly. So instead of sampling and then extrapolating, you've got a greater degree of certainty because you've got the whole picture. And a key part of Biodiversity Net Gain is assess what you've got, identify how much gain you want to deliver, try and restore or create those habitats, and then monitor. And monitoring, and in England, the system requires you to deliver that benefit over 30 years. That's a lot of work. So actually being able to use tools such as BNG AI to do that monitoring and evaluation, it still needs ground truthing. You know, we've all acknowledged that.
Yeah.
But it's the only way we're going to get through this and make BNG work for people and for nature.
And just as this morning we were hearing about the amazing kind of resolution that kind of satellites are able now to kind of zoom in on as well, down to kind of 30 centimeters. So again, having something that's habitat-based, it allows you to begin to be able to take quite informed kind of decisions around, actually we can with a degree of good certainty, identify that it's this particular habitat. Yes, you do need a degree of ground truthing, but it opens up the real opportunity to then to kind of utilize technologies in a really exciting way that has never kind of previously been possible.
Yeah, and a big benefit of the metric has been that it kind of lays out the framework for everybody to follow and leads to a very standardized, fungible output that can be used to translate biodiversity between one land and another land. However, a criticism of, or the contrarian view to the approach has been that it reduces the nature to numbers. So keeping that in mind, how do you balance the complexity of nature with the need for clear, actionable tasks that need to come out to be able to achieve the gain?
Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. You need to be able to give people information on which to base sound business decisions and investment decisions. So you have to accept that you have to come up with the best representation you can of that complexity, which for us is the metric, which, as I say, will continue to improve. And then you've got data, you've got numbers, you've got evidence that you can present to your bosses, to your boards, to your investors, to give them confidence not only in what you've got, but what your plans are to improve that. So there will always be people that will resist the idea of reducing nature to numbers. But if we don't take this approach, we're going to continue losing nature at an alarming rate, and that's unsustainable.
It also means as well that, so there are important concepts within conservation and ecology around the mitigation hierarchy. So trying to avoid having an impact on the really valuable habitats where you can, but also kind of, and avoiding having to go off-site, offsetting as well, which is, it's tended to be used in some other kind of international approaches. But being able to kind of put values around individual habitats helps you to really identify, actually along this route, along this network, where are the really valuable spaces for nature? What can I do to try and protect those? What can I do to potentially enhance those? Possibly get paid by someone else for doing that as well. So it's easy to think of, well, nature's just intrinsically valuable. Well, yes, it is, but we live in a world of numbers. We live in a kind of capitalist world as well. And so you need the tools of being able to try and to be able to communicate that and engage kind of others within the business. So engage, have a language that allows you to talk to the engineers, talk to other professions as well around the business about the importance of nature in a language that they can understand. And the numbers and the metric helps with that.
Thank you. And we've now had this regulation live for just under a year. And as Natural England, like you've been listening to and possibly hearing a lot of stories about the challenges that people are facing, how they're overcoming it. So keeping that in mind, can you tell us a bit about those challenges and how they're being overcome? And as we talk to the audience here about how to bring that approach and apply it to improve the land, what kind of pitfalls to avoid, tips and tricks that you can share?
So, I mean, Sally's already highlighted one in that this is, as an approach, there is a really important role for ecologists here as well. And you could argue there's never going to be enough ecologists. But actually, this is, if you're going to have the system to work, lots of other professions need to understand and engage with it as well. Landscape architects, engineers, legal professionals, and others. So the kind of upskilling of knowledge around how the system has worked, that takes time to roll out as well. So this was that. In England, the way the consenting process works is it's very diverse as well. So you have over 300 kind of different consenting bodies. So trying to get kind of consistency of approaches through that. This is why the legislation was adopted to say actually we're going to nationally mandate an approach, and also, as Sally said, nationally mandate a single metric, because one of the lessons learned from carbon was that having a multiplicity of metrics doesn't really help anyone. You need a consistent approach. This has been a really kind of paradigm shift, if you like, in terms of the way that development thinks about nature. Historically in England, it was often an afterthought. Sites weren't particularly designed with kind of nature in mind, and no one was thinking about the long-term management and maintenance of that nature that was retained. It's changing that conversation completely. It's putting nature at the forefront of development, thinking, actually, how can you integrate nature in a way that helps with this development itself, helps to make it more resilient, potentially if it's housing, make it more attractive as a place to live or invest in. But that's a real shift, and that doesn't happen overnight as well. So there is a need for kind of ongoing kind of training and guidance and education to get this policy set out.
And it's a long journey. I mean, initial measurement is just the start. Even the BNG requirements in the UK, England are 30-year-long plans. And any improvement that is being planned on land by the utilities is going to be similarly long duration or longer. So considering that in mind, it's a question for both of you. What kind of role do you see digital playing in the entire life cycle management of delivering the gain on land?
I think, as I say, it's going to be key just because of the scale of the monitoring and evaluation that's going to need to take place. To some extent, utilities as major landowners are in a better place a lot than other types of developers. House builders typically develop a housing estate, sell it, and move on. So the thought that they're going to be responsible for the biodiversity gain on that site for 30 years is quite traumatic for some, to be honest. But they're getting used to the idea. But for utility companies, they are the landowners, they are the land managers. They're invested in those sands, those bits of land. But in order to have that information base about how to manage that land effectively, how to continue to deliver that nature benefit, adaptive management, because it's no recipe book, things will go wrong. So to be able to do adaptive management, they need to have that constant stream of data and information readily available to drive their decision making.
And as we were hearing earlier this morning as well about the real power of data is almost as a predictive tool as well, being able to identify which of the kind of power lines or the poles may be at risk of failure. The same can be applied to habitats as well. So as Sally said, this is 30 years of management. And the technology allows you to say, actually, to what extent are these habitats delivering in the way that we anticipated they would? What are the ones, where are the locations where maybe an intervention's needed by ecologists and others to try and get this habitat back performing as was expected, so that it's delivering the outcomes for nature, but also delivering some of the other benefits for the network. So there's a real opportunity for technology then. But then at the same time, as I was saying at the start, this is introducing a whole new asset class. It's creating a market around nature as well. So for organisations that own and manage land, particularly where you've got lands that potentially are stranded assets, they're not being used kind of commercially at the moment. There's a real opportunity then to say, actually, I could generate an income myself from this by managing it better for nature. And where you've got very large estates, then the kind of data, the use of AI can really help you identify, actually, these are the locations where that opportunity exists as well. And also, how can nature works best when and habitats work best when they're connected across a wider landscape. And so being able to identify not just the kind of power networks, but also the nature networks that are interacting with that. And where would an intervention have that maximum impact, the biggest bang for the buck? And again, I think that's where kind of technologies can play a really key role in terms of mobilizing a lot of that external data to highlight these are the optimum locations to undertake these interventions.
And I think creating those nature networks, utilities can be in a very powerful place, given the large amount of land, connected land, that they either own or manage. As in the US, we know that the regulations are at a state level. So different states are at different places. There are some states with some degree of regulation around improvement of watersheds. So as those regulations evolve, how do you see the impact of that coming out of it?
So there's a huge amount of interest internationally in what's happening in England at the moment and the approach that's been taken. So a lot of jurisdictions are quite actively looking at, actually, is this a useful mechanism, a mechanism that we could transfer back to our own jurisdiction? But also, there are versions of the metric that are in use in the States. So there's an America's metric that has been developed, that is already being used. And some of the organisations here, so have got UK subsidiaries that have already been doing a lot in this space as well, looking at actually how can they change the way they're managing their assets in the way that Sally was saying, that are delivering kind of benefits for nature whilst also potentially kind of enhancing the kind of performance of the grid and the network. So again, learning from some of those organisations as well and applying it in a US context.
And I would also say, involve the ecologists at an early stage and help them, work with them to co-design and co-create those solutions. The ecologists can bring the expertise around what might work to deliver the nature benefit, but they need to understand the commercial realities of businesses. Yes. So it has to be a co-creation of a solution, but involve the ecologists at an early stage.
Yeah, and I think there's a great opportunity. It's not just something that has to be driven by the regulations. Improving the quality of nature, improving the quality of those habitats under the transmission lines can not just add value to the nature around it, but it can also improve the resilience of the overall transmission line as a result. So start early, create a long-term plan, involve not just ecologists, but what you were saying, involve the local communities as well.
Local stakeholders.
They've got a key role in playing in that. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Nick. Thanks for your time, Sally.
Thank you.